Hello and welcome to Everything End of Life with me, Jason Cottrell, and guests. Now, last week we had the brilliant Lee Joshak on diversity of funerals and the whole kit and caboodle of that. It's a really great interview, well worth a listen if you haven't already. Next up, we've got a real special guest. We've got Dr Karen Chumbley, who's going to be talking to us about hospices and what hospices do. I was a charge nurse for a number of years ago, and I didn't really know much about hospices until I actually started working for one. I mean, you'll see the charity shops all around, all over the place, but we never really actually kind of have an understanding of what goes on, I don't think, in a hospice, unless you've actually had some contact with them. So let's hear from Dr Karen Chumbley. So, hello and welcome to Everything End of Life. I'm here with Dr Karen Chumbley, who we'll be calling Karen for the rest of the interview. And she's a palliative care doctor at St Helena Hospice. So, Karen, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What drove you into palliative care?
Thanks, Jason. Well, I'm a GP by background, and I have worked as a GP in Colchester for 20-something years. And what drove me to palliative care was when a patient of mine had a difficult death. And I met with his wife afterwards and we talked about what had happened. And I realised that we could have made things better for him by thinking ahead, by planning, by communicating.
Yeah.
And we did a quality improvement project after that in the surgery and really transformed the way we approach the care of people approaching the end of life. We identified them earlier, we met with them, we planned their care, we coordinated and prepared. And what we saw was, when we did that, we dramatically decreased the amount of people that died in hospital. And they told us that they didn't want to be in hospital at the end of life. And by preparing and planning, we were able to look after them in the place of their preference. And that just gave me a passion for improving that care at that time of life. And from then, I was asked to work at the hospice. And I've been there on and off over the last 8 years. And I'm now the Chief Clinical Officer there at St Helena in Colchester.
Hey, success at last. From my point of view, I'm a former charge nurse of psychiatry working in elderly care. I don't say that to go whoopee, but what I'm getting at here is I never knew what a hospice does. Mm-hmm. And I know that there are lots of people listening also are quite confused as to what the role of the hospice is, because in my limited knowledge before I became a carer for St Helena, I just kind of thought that was a place where people went to die. And I wasn't quite sure why they weren't dying in hospital, or how that all looked, what the end of life actually looked like. Mm-hmm. So what does it offer? What does the hospice offer people that the hospital can't?
Well, hospices really started as a movement over the last 50 years, led by Dame Cicely Saunders. And what it was a movement to improve the experience of the last period of life. And hospices are the embodiment of that. Often they are organisations fundraised for over generations by a community. Yeah. And they have become services and often have a building where they offer palliative care. And palliative care differs from care of other illnesses in that its aim is not to make the person better. Its aim is to improve the quality of life. So it is a service for people who have life-limiting illness, whatever that is, and it's there to improve their physical symptoms, to support them psychologically, socially, and spiritually, to really see the whole person and not just part of the person. So the hospice we have at St Helena, we have a building, but the majority of the work that we do is in the community. So we have teams of nurses that will go out and see people in the community. We have a team of doctors that do likewise. And then we also have a hospice inpatient unit where people can come. But even then, half of the people that come for symptom relief, and they come perhaps with pain or shortness of breath, and we'll change their medicines and support them, and they might have physiotherapy and rehabilitation and some complementary therapies, and then when their symptoms have settled, they're able to go home and live a better quality of life in this last phase.
That's fascinating. So the other thing is that I had a friend who was diagnosed with a terminal illness, and I don't know how you doctors determine how long somebody's got, but he was told apparently that he's got about 3 years. Now that could be 2 years, could be 4 years, you know. But he was referred to his hospice. This is up in London, not for anything care-wise, but just for counselling.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that our hospice does?
Mm-hmm. We do have emotional support team. Not everybody who has a life-limiting illness needs to come to a hospice for that. But for people with particular needs, yes, we do offer that. Supporting people with particular, complex needs, or where there's a particularly complex family situation. Yeah. So there's a whole variety of services that we offer, and people may dip in and out of hospice services over the time of their illness. Perhaps see a nurse for a few sessions if they have pain or a difficult other symptom, and then stabilise and not need a service for a while and step away. But know that they can call again if things become more unstable. Yeah,
and it's definitely from what I've seen when I go into the community, is we will have people referred to us who seem practically at the end of life, and then they rally for a short while. It could be 4 or 5 weeks, mm-hmm. and then they start to go down again and sleep much more, mm-hmm. and start that process off. So, when we're when we're first diagnosed, that's something that we people find, I think, really difficult to talk about. Mm-hmm. Since I came to the hospice, it's struck me that it's much more easy to talk about death and dying, mm-hmm. than if I was just a nurse I wonder how much education goes on for general practice, for doctors, for hospital staff, about end-of-life care. The reason I say that is because my sister went into hospital a little while ago and sadly passed away, or died, let's not just cut to the chase on that, mm-hmm. use the right language. And she suffered from morbid agitation. And just a quick explanation of that is that and you'll know, obviously, but she got quite angry. Her personality changed quite a bit, but only over a course of a day or two. And she didn't quite get the right medications, because if they had recognised it was morbid agitation, they might have upped her medication to kind of take account of that. Now, that's not a complaint, because the nurses were amazing. They did an incredible job. And because she pulled all her lines out, so she wasn't getting the medication or the oxygen. Soon as that happened, they were right on it and sorted her out, and then they got to understand what that was, because I was able to say, mm-hmm. I think you'll find this is not her normal personality. So what I'm wondering is, how much education is there in general for doctors at that level, consultants, because we kind of got the impression they wanted to just keep on treating her, mm-hmm. until she died, rather than saying, well, this is the end game, let's change the care plan.
I think you're right. I think when I was at university some years ago, there was very little teaching about end-of-life care, and medicine was all about extending life, keeping treating until the end, as you say. Yeah. And I think what we have recognised as people are living longer is that there can come a stage where the continuing to treat is not in that person's best interest, and we can actually make the quality of life worse by failing to recognise that the end of life is coming.
Yeah.
And so there's much more discussion now, much more education that we're involved with, both with undergraduates and with junior doctors, at looking at the patterns of end of life, recognising when the person is not improving, understanding that forming an accurate prognosis can be difficult, but looking for patterns that would suggest that somebody is approaching the end of life, and recognising that, and very gently exploring with the person whether they would like to know what's happening, what is their understanding of what's happening, and then focusing the treatment that you offer around the wishes of that person.
It can. I've also seen. I mean, it can be quite difficult for nurses and carers. Also, when we go into relatives, into people's homes, and the relatives are there, and the relatives say things like, "Please don't tell Mum that she's dying," and that's a really tricky one. And so I can see how doctors can get misfooted by that, because you want to do the best for everybody, I guess, all round. But if that person has capacity, if that person has, their compos mentis, surely it's their right, isn't it, to know?
It's an area where we would explore gently.
Yeah.
You're right, we can't be complicit and hide information from somebody who wants to know. So I will ask somebody, how is it for you? Are you somebody that wants to know what's going on? Are you somebody that prefers not to know and just take each day as it comes? We know from studies and from talking to our patients that most people do want to know if they're approaching the end of life. And that feeling of protection that relatives have is natural and instinctive.
Yeah.
But often the person themselves will say, my family keep telling me I'm going to get better, but I know I'm not, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And it's the person themselves is often at peace with what's going on, but the family are rallying to protect and struggling more to face it. In fact, people themselves are better at understanding how long they may have to live than doctors are.
Yeah.
And so I will often start a conversation asking somebody what's their understanding of their illness is and how they feel things are going. And then on the understanding of that, when we find a shared understanding of what's happening with them, we then explore what's important to them.
Do you know what I was in the IPU, the inpatient unit, the other day, and I passed this room and there was a chap there. He's got his feet up and he looked quite comfortable, and he was writing. And I just jokingly said, "Oh, I'm a writer, so what are you writing?" And he said, "My will." And I went, "Oh, okay." Just crashed into that one. I went, "Oh, right, okay. So how's that for you?" And he said, "Well, for me, it's fine. I'm okay. I'm all right with this. I know what's going to happen. My family are in bits, so I'm making sure I've got everything organised so they can't bicker, and they can't fight, and because my daughter's feeling really angry. My wife is, she's in tears, but it's not going to happen for a couple of years. So, well, I'm all right with it, but I want to make sure they're all right." And I just thought that was really touching. He's kind of still looking after them all.
Yes, absolutely. Those preparations and conversations that you have before death can really protect the family afterwards. Not just in preparing wills, but also in advanced care planning, which is when we discuss with somebody what kind of care they want. If they were more unwell and unable to say in the situation what was important to them. So we ask, what would you like to happen if you were more unwell? And we know that not only helps that person to have the kind of care that they need, but it also supports the family, who can look back at that time and think, do you know what, we know what mum or dad wanted in that situation, and we coordinated their care around their wishes. And so their distress and grief can be lessened by that preparation. So it can put people's minds at rest themselves, but also support and protect their family.
Right. And that brings me nicely on to this thing that St Helena has come up with called My Care Choices Record. And I think you had a big part in that, collating that.
Yes, so the My Care Choices Register is a digital database, really, and it's where people who are in the last phase of life, the last years of life, can record their preferences for future care. So they have a chance to say what's important to them and who's important to them, what they would want to happen if they were more unwell, and perhaps what they wouldn't want to happen. They can record things that they would like people around them to know about them, and they can express what their fears are and things they'd like to particularly avoid. And there are particular things we ask. For example, do they have what we call a lasting power of attorney, somebody they have appointed legally to be able to speak for them. And then they also can record where they wish to be cared for, and then also cared for particularly at the end of life. And it's a really useful thing to share because it's on a protected database, not publicly accessible, but it can be seen by healthcare professionals that will care for them. So if a paramedic came out in the middle of the night, they can call their clinical office and say, can you tell me what's recorded for this person, what their priorities are. It's visible in the hospital, by the out of hours doctors, by the hospice and primary care. And so the aim is to get what's important to the person really at the heart of things, so that that's the driver for their future care. So if somebody says, look, I really at this point I don't want to go to hospital anymore. I understand that they can give treatments that I can't have in the community, but I've just got to the point in my life where I want to be at home. We can record that, and then that can organise how care is then coordinated for the future. So perhaps from that discussion we might arrange for medications to be in the home just in case of symptoms, in order that if they felt worse, we've got something there to hand. We know that when people are on the My Care Choices register, they are much less likely to die in hospital than if they haven't had those conversations. We know that the vast majority of people who say where they want to be cared for towards the end of their life, if they have those conversations and they record it, then we know that most of the time it's possible to care for them in that preferred place.
Yeah.
So it's all about preparation. The My Care Choices Register is a tool, and we really want people to be aware of it, so that they think, I want to take a bit more control over this period of my life. Now, of course, it's a time when there can be crises. There can be events that we can't predict, and sometimes it's not all to plan. But the more we prepare and the more we share with our families and with our healthcare professionals, the more control there is, and the more likely it is to be prepared for and calm and coordinated.
Okay, well that strikes me as being very familiar, because one of the things I really like, and this is going to sound a bit strange, is I love cooking. Okay, but and my other job obviously is going around and delivering cooking oil, and I steal recipes from all the chefs, which is great. And when I go into these chefs, some of the chefs are fine, they're called top, middle of service, everything's running around, and they'll say, hello Jason, how are you? Do you want a cup of tea? Pop in the other room there, I'll bring one in to you, and we can have a chat. And some chefs will say, not now Jason, I'm really under the stress, it's no good at all. And what I notice about all of this, and the panicky ones, is they haven't prepared. And this is, I think, is the same thing. It's all about preparing and being ready, so it takes the sting out of everything, takes the panic out of everything. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I mean, I don't want to be idealistic. The end of life is still a difficult time, and unexpected things do happen, and distress and upset can occur.
Yeah.
But what we want to do is we want to do everything in our power to minimise that. Dying is hard enough. It is upsetting enough.
Yeah.
And we want that difficult time of life to be as calm and as well supported as we can. And the more planning we do, the more likely it is that we can coordinate things for that person. So we don't make things perfect by any means, but it's all helpful to support the person and their family.
That's absolutely wonderful. So the hospice is there to support people during from the time that they're maybe diagnosed as terminal, or it becomes aware that they've got a journey that might be shorter than they were expecting. And so they can self-refer as well, is that correct?
Yes, you can self-refer. So there, St Helena have a website where you can refer yourself, or you can call. They have a 24-hour single point of access that you can call and refer yourself. If you want to refer a relative or loved one, you do need their consent to refer.
Okay.
And
point.
Also the hospital can refer to the hospice, and GPs will often refer to the hospice as well. So there's all sorts of ways of approaching it, but the ringing the hospice is a really good step to take, because you can speak to a nurse and explain the situation, and then they're experts and they can guide.
Right, well, Just one last thing, because we also have this other form that I've got in front of me, which is respect. So, it kind of is largely to do with my care choices, isn't it?
So the respect form is a replacement for the form that we used, which we used to call a do not attempt cardiopulmonary resuscitation form. And it was a red form, and doctors would have a conversation with a person about whether they would offer resuscitation, CPR, if somebody's heart stopped.
Right.
And that's a discussion and a process that has had a lot of publicity over the pandemic. There's been fear of these orders. You might hear them being called DNA CPR orders, do not attempt CPR orders. Yeah. And there was a fear that they were being used in a blanket manner, perhaps in care homes in the first wave of the pandemic.
Without people's consent, actual consent.
That was the report. I don't think that happened widely, but there were areas where it was misused. And that conversation is a really difficult conversation to have. It's important to not do CPR, by which we mean chest compressions and electric shocks to the heart, if it's not going to be helpful, if it's not going to work. On the other hand, it's very challenging if somebody is going into hospital or the hospice and you're having a conversation almost immediately about treatment that you don't want to give them. And what was happening was people were going through their journey with a life-limiting illness, or perhaps in frail health at the end of life. And they would recurrently have this very jarring conversation where the doctors would tell them what they didn't want to offer.
Yeah.
And so there's been a move away from that form, away from the do not attempt CPR form and conversation, towards a respect conversation. Now, respect is a recommended summary plan for emergency care and treatment, and it's a much better process and form. And what it is a conversation where, again, like with My Care Choices, you say, what is your understanding of your condition and where you are right now? And then in light of that, what is important to you? Is it comfort? Is it to live as long as possible? Is it a balance between those things? Right. And then when you have a shared understanding between the person and their healthcare professional, then you can start to have a conversation about what would and wouldn't be acceptable to that person. So it's a conversation, instead of just being about not offering chest compressions and electric shocks to the heart, it's a conversation about what that person would like, what they would accept. So I will often have this conversation with people as they move into a care home if they're elderly. And I'll say, look, I'm your new GP, and I want to make sure that we offer you the care in the future that is acceptable to you. So let's just talk a little bit about your health condition, and in light of that, what might happen in the future. And if that did happen, for example, if you fell and we were worried you'd fractured, would you be happy with us to take you to hospital? Or if you had a chest infection and we couldn't get you better just in the care home, would you be happy for us to transfer you to hospital for antibiotics? And you get a chance really to explore different scenarios that are common in that situation and hear what's important to them and what they would want for themselves.
Right.
And so then we use the form to record what that person would find acceptable and what together we've decided wouldn't be suitable. So some people would say to me, well, I wouldn't want to have a feeding tube perhaps if I couldn't eat and drink.
Right.
Or I wouldn't want to go to an intensive care unit. So you would record what would be acceptable, for example, going to hospital and having antibiotics, but then you could say, but we think perhaps that's the level of treatment that would be acceptable, and you can document it, and then if that person is unwell in the future and cannot speak for themselves in that crisis, then you've got some guidance as the new healthcare professional coming in about what that person wanted to prioritise in a crisis. It still has an area on the form for a recommendation about CPR, that's the chest compressions, but it's not the major part of the discussion.
Right.
So a much better, friendlier, more holistic conversation.
Yeah, so not so in your face.
Yeah.
I've got to say, I trained in a huge institution 40 odd years ago, and things have changed tremendously, because this wasn't even a conversation that was thought even appropriate, you know. And you wouldn't say to somebody, okay, well, you wouldn't say anything really, you'd just keep treating them until they die, you know, which is a real shame. So it's really nice to see that things have changed over the years. Right, so I want to say thank you very much, Karen, for being so informative. I've really enjoyed it, and I think I'm a bit more informed about your role and the role of the hospice, because, you know, even though I work for the hospice, you know, unless we actually talk about all of these things, quite often I'll just go out and help patients in the community, which is great. I love it, you know, it's really good. But then the bigger picture sometimes we don't really get to think about, to talk about. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, a big thank you to Dr Karen Chumbley there for that brilliant, insightful interview into hospices and hospice care and all that entails. And as we said before, there are many different hospices around the country, and they all offer slightly different services, but along the same theme. So if you're worried about anything, you can get in touch with your local or the nearest hospice to you, and they are all charities. I think you'll find 99% anyway. So next week we are going to be having a chat with Di Renders, who's going to tell us her story about how her husband Roger was diagnosed with a terminal illness, and her journey all the way through that as he died last year up until now. And it's a really fascinating story. She's a lovely lady, and I hope you enjoy it. So I'll be coming next week. If you like the podcast, do like it on Facebook, and feel free to give it a big share. That'd be fantastic and help a great deal. All right, so long, and see you next week.